Do you believe in ghosts?
This is the night when fear and horror walk hand in hand.
This is Black Sabbath.
three blokes that you joined Black Sabbath, were they all mates from home, from Birmingham?
Yeah, we all come from an Birmingham's an industrial town. It's like factories, and my father worked in a factory. All our fathers worked in factories. I went to school with Tony, and I was in a band with Geezer, and Bill was in a band with Tony, and it's like a small community kind of a thing, and we eventually ended up together.
Right?
Tell me every night you have to.
Like a little girl behind the wall. My father played accordion and harmonica. Not that much, but he did. They were always they were very poor and most of the time out working, So I didn't really hear my dad play much, very rare really. He'd pick up the accordion and play, but that was basically my first instrument, because being in the family, I started to learn to play it. First of all, I wanted to be a drummer, but they wouldn't let me have drums because the house wasn't big enough for a start. It was too noisy, so I got listening to different music, I got attracted to the guitar. Well, it was more rock and roll then I used to listen to, because that was on the radio, and it'd sort of be, I can't remember what the first one was, but it would sort of be Chuck Berry stuff or Buddy Holly or somebody like that. It was difficult really, because there was a lot of gangs and stuff around where we lived. So if you weren't in a gang, it was a bit difficult, and I didn't want to particularly be in a gang. So the music side of it sort of really helped me get away from that. What really appealed to me later was the instrumental stuff by the Shadows, who were probably the biggest instrumental band in England at the time. Cliff Richard was a singer, and then they used to back him, but they also did instrumentals, which for me was great because I could try and learn the instrumentals. It was something to learn. I was in a factory, and strangely enough, I'd given my notice in to leave because I was going to turn professional with a band, go to Europe. So I'd auditioned with this band, they liked me, and I was about to get ready to go away, which would have been the first time for me, and I was really excited about it. I went to work on the morning, and I used to do welding, electric welding and gas welding in the factory. And the one day this person didn't come in who used to send me the metal down, and I'd weld it. And they said, you've got to go on the machine yourself because there's nobody else to do it. Oh God. So they put me on this big, huge, giant guillotine press. So as I'm pushing the metal through into the press, the machine came down on my hand. And the action of pulling my hand back quick, I pulled the ends of the fingers off. I mean, that was it then for me. I thought, oh God, I just couldn't believe it. The last day, I can't remember an exact time, but it was, I did, while the bandages were on, I was trying to learn to play with my two fingers. And it seemed like forever, I went back and I started to make my own tips. Suddenly I'm there faced with not being able to play a full chord because of my fingers. And that's, I think, what made me sort of come up with the sort of Black Sabbath thing, the sound, because trying to make the sound bigger to fill in for the full chords that I couldn't play anymore.
I was in a band with Geezer before Black Sabbath called the Rare Breed. And I wasn't a buddy of Tony's at school. He was in a year higher than me, but we knew each other. And I knew he was a guitar player, and I got into singing.
Bill and myself were in a different band, and then we broke up, and then we were looking for a singer and a bass player. And we went around to see this ad. We saw this ad in the music shop saying Ozzy Zig requires gig.
It was just a name. I thought, well, I've got to have a star name in the track. There's like about 8,000 fucking ads, and I got to stick out above the rest. So I go, Ozzy Zig. Well, that's got to attract some fucking Sunshine in the KC band or whatever.
It requires gig.
He did as well. I mean, he did it. I mean, it worked actually because it did. It was stood out a mile.
Look what happened.
Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode in my Black Sabbath album deep dive series. Of course, I am going to be talking about their debut album. This was released on Friday the 13th, February 13th, 1970, and it was recorded in one 12-hour session back in October of 1969 with very minimal overdubs. The only real overdubs were kind of like the wind and howling noises at the beginning of the title track and a guitar solo overdubbed, I believe, on NIB. But apart from that, they were recorded live, and Ozzy Osbourne actually did his vocals right as the band were laying down their instrumental takes because they didn't have a whole lot of time to waste, and they also, studio time was very expensive, and so they weren't going to be spending a lot of time working on the debut of a relatively unknown band at that time. This is my cassette copy of the album, and I've got two CD copies. This is the original CD release, and then this is the remastered version, which came out, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. The first Black Sabbath album was definitely a groundbreaking album. It was the start of heavy metal. It was the start of doom metal. Even though we now consider this album to be a masterpiece, at the time, I don't think people knew what to make of it. It sounded too sludgy. It sounded too heavy. I think the dark tones, the dark lyrical content of a lot of the album turned off some music listeners. Critics at the time were not very impressed with the album. And it's one of those albums where in hindsight, it's like, yeah, we understand. We can now appreciate the brilliance of this album and how influential it was. But back in the day, I don't think people knew really what to make of it. The cover itself is also very iconic, very creepy, very dark. Now, if you're wondering, this model, her name is Louisa Livingstone. And this photograph was taken at Maple Durham Water Mill. And the color textures, I think, add a lot of the creepiness to it. It's actually pretty beautiful if you see just a regular picture of it. They wanted to give it a very much a smoky, kind of a misty feel, and so they were throwing a lot of dry ice into the lake, and then they ended up using a smoke machine. She talks about it was very, very cold during the shoot. She did not have anything underneath that cloak, and I guess there's some variations, photographs that they took for this cover where she was revealing a little bit more, but then they decided that didn't work. It kind of took away from the whole mood that they were going for on this album cover, but it's certainly one of the most powerful, creepiest covers of the heavy metal era. The album starts off with Black Sabbath, and was there ever a more appropriate album opener for a band called Black Sabbath back in 1970? It is dark. It has some satanic lyrical themes. The lyrics were based, Geezer Butler, one time, he was heavily into the occult. He had bought a bunch of books on the occult. He had painted his room black. He had put a bunch of inverted crosses up in his home. And one night he woke up to find this shadowy figure at the foot of his bed. And when he got up the next morning, the satanic Bible that he had was completely gone. And that freaked him out so much that he got rid of all his occult paraphernalia, and he wrote the lyrics to this song. But it's so dark. I mean, this started the doom metal genre. It's slow, it's sludgy, it's terrifying at times, and it's heavy. It is such a tremendous album opener. The next track is the bluesy The Wizard. I love that echoey harmonica at the beginning. Apparently the wizard of this song is Gandalf from the Lord of the Rings. The Wizard is just a straightforward, heavy blues song. It's in keeping with the theme of the occult and magic. with the first medley on the album. It starts off with Wasp, then Behind the Wall of Sleep, into the bass solo basically, and then the final track is NIB. No, there are all these great guitar riffs from Tony Iommi. They're so melodic, they're so heavy, they're so sludgy. But it all works. I don't care if you're a heavy metal fan or not. This is just great heavy rock and roll music. And just to think again that the band recorded this album in 12 hours is just mind-blowing. And it's an album where they had the opportunity to kind of refine these songs in live performances, but they all work great. This is basically the template for heavy metal, what you have right here. But it's also excellent bluesy, hard rock and roll. And Geezer, Tony, and Bill are such a tight ensemble. There's no sloppiness to the playing. They're all great in their own way, and they all come together, and they just made something magical on this album. You got the bass solo, which is basically, and then you have NIB, which people over the years have thought to mean Nativity in Black, but apparently the band says, no, that's not accurate at all. It was referring to this goatee, this pointed goatee that Bill Ward had at one time. But to me, it kind of sounds like John Lennon trying to convince people that Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds didn't stand for LSD, but whatever, it doesn't matter. It's a song about Lucifer falling in love with a beautiful woman, and apparently, according to Geezer Butler, the devil becomes a little better, a little less evil because of his interaction and his infatuation with this woman.
I will give you those things.
It's one of those iconic Black Sabbath songs. They play it in concert every single time. It is just one of the staples of Black Sabbath's catalog. So the track listing on this album is a little different between Europe and North America. In Europe, it starts off with a cover of the Crow song, Evil Woman. Crow were a Minneapolis band, and this was a song off their 1969 debut album. In North America, side 2 starts off with Wicked World, which was actually the B-side to Evil Woman. That's a bit of it starts off as kind of a fast boogie rocker, and then it settles into a little slower, harder, and heavier track. And then the last track on the North American version is the medley, A Bit of Finger, Sleeping Village, and Warning, which basically throws everything at you. It's almost like Black Sabbath doing a little bit of everything on this track. The fast, the heavy. It starts off very slow, almost like a subdued piano type ballad, and then it gets heavier, and it moves through all these different sections. Some are heavier than others, some are faster than others, but it's a very cool display of the range of Black Sabbath's musical styles that they would use. So that's my take on Black Sabbath's debut album. Let me know what you think. It's not my favorite Black Sabbath album, but it's definitely one of the greatest debuts of the 1970s, if not of all time. Hope you've enjoyed this episode, and take care.